This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
A look at the promise and the challenges of life in the suburbs tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. We are joined tonight by two mayors of the suburbs. Mayor Sharon Goldsworthy from Germantown, thank you for being here. Also, Bill Dries, reporter with the Memphis Daily News, and Stan Joyner, mayor of Collierville.
Glad to be here.
We tried to get some of the other suburban mayors on and suburban folks, but I think with vacations and such, you all are allowed to take vacations, but we have you two here and appreciate that. You both have just finished budget season. We've spent a lot of time on budget season for the city and for the county. You both were faced with something you probably didn't want to do, which were tax increases. And I'll start with you. You had to do a big tax increase. We're coming off a reappraisal year, coming off a really bad recession. You were faced in Germantown with some tough decisions. Tell us about your budget season. Tell us about the challenges you face in terms of, you know, the services you want to provide and the taxes that it would take to provide those services.
Okay, we kind of will refer to this budget preparation year for fiscal year 2014 as kind of the perfect storm. We kind of saw it coming over a number of years, not only just from when the recession set in and wondering when it would finally end, and realizing that we aren't there yet, but nevertheless, reappraisal. We had seen sales tax flatten as an outcome of the recession, but also not after one surge last year, then proceed to drop again. So we were looking at how do you stretch revenues affected both by the reappraisal and the sales tax decline, how to make that match. We have been using for several years now in Germantown what we think of as business strategies to really find the most efficient and effective way to deliver services. We used a process called managed competition, which engages employees to figure out the best way to do something. And I'm talking about employees, as we say, if you want to know how to fill a pothole, ask the guy who actually has the shovel in his hand. We'd been doing a lot of that. We picked a lot of low-hanging fruit. So even as the recession came in and began to impact revenues, we were already engaged in cost-cutting, shrinkage measures. Then a couple years ago, we really began looking at long-term sustainability on top of everything else. And we have been using the Malcolm Baldrige criteria, which triple bottom line of fiscal, economic, and social sustainability. Part of the fiscal sustainability in particular has to do with process improvement. And this sounds very corporate and everything, because it is. So we have been doing a lot of work on figuring out, again, the best way to do something. And by doing that, we had effectively reduced a lot of costs. But in the end, we had to have a tax increase because all those measures still didn't match a conservative view on what we could expect in property tax and sales taxes.
And if my numbers are right, you went, again, with the recertification based on the property and so on, you went up to a rate, about a 44.5% increase to 192, you know, approaching that sort of probably a number you really don't want to get to at any point, which is $2. Okay. And was that, I mean, what was that like? I mean, what was it like among your aldermen? What was it like among the citizenry? I mean, what sort of, like, you can't have gotten a lot of great, you know, emails saying, hey, thanks for cutting so much and for the big tax increase.
Well, I think one of the things that we were very determined to do was not to change the quality of service. Our aldermen in January, February tell us, these are the things we'd like to get done this coming year. We then turn to staff and say, okay, figure out the programming that can do that within budget constraints. And this was one of those years in which the first pass on the budget, when the budgets came to administration, they went back to the departments and say, we need to take another run at this. And in some cases, we did a third run, and each time we found still other places. One of the other things that factored into what we were doing was the decision to start our own ambulance service. And that has implications, especially in the first couple years. So there were lots of things in the mix. But we felt in the end, our tax increase, if we were going to ask our citizens to pay that, we could not diminish services. We simply had to figure out smarter ways to do it.
And Mayor Joyner, to bring you in, you also did a tax increase, Collierville did, I should put it all on you, about 10 cents. And did you have to go through the same process of, you can't, some people say just cut. Let's frame it that way, just cut. Government spends too much money, you shouldn't raise taxes. If you can't afford it where we are, you should just cut.
Right. Well, Collierville adopted the certified rate, which was a difference of 10 cents in our tax rate, but it is still revenue neutral in that it generated, and that's what we wanted, it generated the same amount of revenue that the prior tax rate had generated. We started the budget process very early in January, anticipating the reappraisal and the downward trend of that reappraisal. So we had a pretty good idea going in of what adjustments we were going to have to make. Our budget this year is not a very glamorous budget. Of course, it's not been a very glamorous budget since 2009. And I would say that probably in preparing for what's happened this year, we started actually back in 2009. We did, as Mayor Goldsworthy has mentioned, a lot of reevaluation about the services and how we provided the services to our residents, and if there were ways that we could do things more cost effectively, and we found out that we could. Personnel-wise, over the last 3 or 4 years, we have trimmed, which is the major area that our costs are. So we had done a lot of rearranging there and internally. And
do you both find that maybe on a smaller scale, because the budgets are smaller, the communities are smaller, but the city of Memphis right now is in this a difficult situation.
Sure.
They end up doing a tax increase. We had Mayor A.C. Wharton on, I believe it was last week, and he was talking about, look, you can only cut so far, and you may disagree with the numbers with him, but philosophically, I imagine that there's a similar feeling. You can only cut so far to where you're not really satisfying the needs of the people, and that you also face this political pressure. And he spoke very passionately about how, on the one hand, everyone wants to cut spending, but no one wants to cut the people or the services associated with those spending. And you see it now with them having, they were going to lay off or get rid of a certain number of firemen and police, but now nobody wants to do that because now you're not going to have a fire station and so on. Right. Do you, on a smaller scale, obviously, have that same tension where people, they want to cut the spending, but when you say, well, what about that actual person or that actual service, they say no.
Right. Well, and reaching out to the community through homeowners association summit meetings that we have, we test those. We asked citizens what they're willing to do without. What things are the town, or is the town providing for you that you're willing to do without? And then, but for us, we get more down into the hundred of thousands of dollars and not the millions of dollars.
Right.
So there's just not that savings for us. When you think that probably 70+% of our expenses are employee expenses, when you get the fixed costs, just doesn't leave a lot of room to cut.
And one I'll highlight, and I should disclose that I have friends very much involved in Tennessee Shakespeare Company, and you all had a really debate. I mean, a very you had people there talking about cutting. I think some $75,000, I believe, was the amount for the education programs for Tennessee Shakespeare Company, and that's the kind of thing that in the city budget, going back to what you said.
Right.
I mean, they don't debate $75,000. They debate, 500 or $1 million or $2 million or $3 million. But you all debated that Tennessee Shakespeare funding, and ultimately decided you had to reduce it. But is that the same, as Mayor Joyner said, the same kind of process you have to go through with every $50,000, every $100,000?
No, I think one of the things that we had determined after the recession began, that we had to look not only at how could we do things more effectively, but were there some things that we were doing that did not necessarily support our core business. And that's when you begin to look at the generosity that we'd had in the past toward some community groups. And very understandably, we think very legitimately say there are times when it's appropriate for city government to support certain things. But when push comes to shove on tight budgeting, those are among the first things that you really look at. We don't look first and foremost at police and fire. Although they clearly had a mandate also to look at how they could reduce costs.
Okay, Bill.
I think we've talked before about sales tax revenue, and that I think is more of a bigger deal for your budgets than possibly we hear from the city of Memphis. So what are you each seeing in terms of sales tax revenue growth or non-growth on it?
Well, in Collierville, over the last couple years, we've seen nice increases. 2 years ago, I think it was 10%. Last year, a little bit less than that. This year, it was pretty flat, but that's what we had projected that it would be. But we are dependent on the revenue that we get from the sales tax, and our sales tax has been good. We've really had a good measure of that with the 0.5% sales tax increase that we approved last year for schools, and seeing the revenue that came in from that, because that's new revenue to us. Of course, it's dedicated toward schools, but our sales tax is strong. We hope that it will continue to be strong and that it will increase, and it's very important to us for sure.
Mayor Goldsworthy, what has Germantown seen in this regard, kind of the arc over several years with sales tax?
We've had a different experience than Collierville, and I'm envious. Several years back, we had approached a time when sales tax was producing close to 20% of our general revenues, and we are now in a position we're looking at 16%. So that's one more reason why the property tax rate was adjusted upward, because it has to be covered somehow. We've had, I think, the usual things that have happened in the recession. We've had some store closures, things like that. We have really mounted what we thought were very vigorous Shop Germantown campaigns and such, but we have just been more than a little bit frustrated by a flatness or even a decline. And we always project conservatively on revenues, and then when you don't make those projections, you say, wait a minute. And one of the outcomes of this, not only have we been looking at how we can improve our sales tax revenues in Germantown by a more vigorous local retail economy, we have now adopted a very specific economic development strategy, and that truly includes retail. And we're kind of in a new era for Germantown. We have not done that in a calculated, strategic way until the last year or so.
It was interesting. I was looking, and maybe I'm the only person in the world who does this, but I was looking at census figures as we were preparing for the show from 2000 to 2010, and people talk about Memphis shrinking, and it's down about 6% over that 10-year period, and Germantown's about flat, and that was really interesting to me. I guess it's one of the oldest of the suburbs, I suppose, and so whereas Collierville was up 40%, a place like Lakeland is up 450%, Bartlett is up, but Germantown, is that a problem, or is that just your reality? You've kind of apparently hit a perfect population according to the way people want to live.
Okay, that's our reality. We are annexed out, unlike the other municipalities. So the type of explosive growth that we experienced in the 70s and 80s and 90s, that went away a long time ago. So we had been having gradual growth. With the recession, the housing developments kind of went away. They disappeared. I'm thrilled that we are now having new subdivisions being approved and new houses going up. But we had never expected to grow much beyond 45,000 to 50,000 at total build out. And we're a ways from that. But that is also key to something else that happens on sales tax. We share the state sales tax, and it's on a per capita. And those communities that are continuing to grow benefit from that growth. We don't. Couple that with the state sales tax also being down during the recession period, and that's another reduction that we are powerless to do anything about.
Yeah. Bill.
Mayor Joyner, on the other hand, you've seen a population increase, and Collierville is not annexed out at the same time, but there are also challenges with that, because Collierville in the last 10 years certainly has had a very important discussion about what that growth means to the continuing nature of Collierville.
Sure, absolutely, and there's a mixed camp there. We are a community, including our annexation reserve, of about 50 square miles. We're on 30 to 35 square miles right now, but a lot of that is across the Wolf River, so that presents some challenges for us to provide the services up there. We have done everything that we can from a planning standpoint, comprehensive plan, land use plan, to see that Collierville develops out in the vision that we want it to develop out. And we've held very closely to that. But in years past where you could make it across town in 10 minutes, well, today it may take you 25 minutes. So anytime you have that type of growth, though, I think that's going to be the challenge for you. I welcome that. Having grown up in Collierville and spent most of my adult life there, it is certainly a change that I see, day to day. But you have to embrace a lot of that. It's coming whether you want it or not.
We've talked about economic development strategies, and Mayor Goldsworthy, you hit on something that I don't think we hear in the normal economic development conversations, and that is a shop Germantown or a shop Collierville strategy there. Usually we think of, okay, our strategy is corporate headquarters, our strategy is manufacturing.
Well, we like corporate headquarters too. Probably one of the areas that has been very vigorous in Germantown, even during the recession, has been the development of the medical community. Right now, Baptist is coming in for approval Monday night for a new Baptist rehab at Wolf River and Germantown Roadway, a marvelous new building, and we have a third medical building going. So we have continued to have that, and that has been, I think, just a circumstance of geography, which has played very, very well for us. Certainly, we are interested in the corporate headquarters. That is part of our strategy as well. But the retail is just fundamental to not only how you generate revenues, but very importantly, how a community works well. People like the convenience of being able to shop nearby. And as we've explained in our Shop Germantown, your loyalty to local stores means that they'll be there when at 5 o'clock on Saturday night, if somebody needs a new shirt or something, you cannot go online and get it delivered for you.
Right. And Mayor Joyner, your economic development strategy, I mean, is there that retail component, but also, and maybe with more land and growth, you can look to more industrial, more warehousing, more of those kind of things
Certainly.
we think of as big ticket economic development?
Absolutely. Collierville, historically has been a community that tried to provide everything that its residents needed, from shopping to corporate headquarters as well. And we've been about the retail development for a number of years. We coined the phrase of shop, dine, and unwind in Collierville a number of years ago. And I made that presentation to the Chamber of Commerce, very well embraced. And of course, that was right on the heels of Carriage Crossing, the lifestyle mall opening up in Collierville, which has been a great, great asset for us. But we are going to see, especially with the opening of the multi-modal unit,
Right.
the
rail
rail yard just on our eastern border, we'll see pressure for development from industrial and some more commercial and warehouse, that type.
You both mentioned it, and I wanted to talk about the schools for a second. There was probably one of the least suspenseful votes in local history. I was joking before the show, which was the approval the second time around because of all the court issues of municipal school districts in all the suburbs. And we again joke that people have got so frustrated with us talking about the schools all the time. But I can only imagine how frustrated you have been having to talk about the schools all the time. Do you feel like you've finally gotten to where you wanted to be for so long? I mean, it's not done yet. You won't open schools until next year, but the vote is done. You'll elect school boards this fall. Do you feel a huge sense of relief, and do the people who live in your communities feel that? Well,
I sense that, and I want to thank the voters in the town of Collierville, the citizens there, for turning out and voting, because we had a 26% roughly voter turnout, and that was, my angst, I'll say, is that, it passed by 87% last year, and it passed by 94% this year. But we had a good turnout of the voter, and so I feel like the question was challenged appropriately, and the outcome was what we expected.
Same?
Very much the same, very similar.
And do you fear, we were talking about taxes before, and these tax increases or modest increases, a little bit more increase, and you've got this school commitment around the corner. Clearly, the people of Germantown, the people of Collierville want these schools, but do you think they're ready for what it's going to take in terms of potential revenue associated with those? I mean, is everyone in on both sides? They want the good services, but they want to pay for the good services.
That really came up in the discussion of running up to this referendum. I certainly encountered a number of people, retirees, for instance, say, well, I don't have kids in the system, my grandkids aren't here, but I think this is real important for our community, and do whatever it takes. And while not everybody in Germantown would have that mindset when it comes to how much should we pay to have the privilege of running our own schools, I think the margin of vote, in our case it was 93%, indicates that there is a very strong support, and it's not just for wanting the schools, but a willingness to support them adequately.
Yeah, Mayor Joyner.
And I would say that the actually being delayed a year, I think that the excitement about the possibility of having a municipal school system for our citizens has just increased. And you know, the reaction that we get and the encouragement that we get, you know, is a testament to that. So
The one big outstanding, or there are a lot of outstanding questions, but probably it seems the biggest from a regional point of view is the question of the buildings and, you know, who's going to own those, who's going to pay for them. Are you in negotiations, or where does that stand in terms of the ownership and use of the school buildings themselves?
well, we're not actually in negotiation, but we're anticipating that. Now the attorneys are talking back and forth, but you know, now that the election is over, the referendum has been passed again, I intend, and I think the other mayors will follow to suit with increasing that talk or pressing.
And do you think,
more
you
of that talk.
mentioned attorneys, you said suit, but in a different context. Do you think this will get done without a lawsuit?
You know,
without-
we hope so, but if it takes a lawsuit or if it takes maybe some involvement again from Nashville,
Right.
whatever it takes, we're going to.
The negotiations will be with the county commission or with the schools? I get confused on this point.
We do too.
I feel that makes me feel much better, because right now the county holds the debt. The county, not school system, but the county entity holds the debt, correct?
Yes,
and then
well,
the
we're
buildings
a part of that.
Right, and you're part of and that's
So,
the argument. Yeah, fair enough.
exactly.
That's the argument you all, you know,
Right.
and you and others have made, that we live out here, we pay county taxes. If
Right.
I live in the city, I pay county taxes. But you'll negotiate with the county potentially over the debt, or the school system because they hold the title?
Actually, I think that the true negotiations are going to come down to the schools, to the school board, or the Unified School Board, and our school board, the agreement.
And that's been one of the things, as municipalities, we are the enabling body that creates municipal districts. We have to go through ordinances to set up the elections and everything. Once the school board has been elected, we kind of go, okay, we step back until you send us your budget and ask for your local share of money. So I think that there is continuing effort to see if some issues can be resolved that have circled around lawsuits.
Yeah.
And that truly is between the county and the municipalities.
About 4 minutes left, Bill.
In our Friday edition of our paper, we have some comments from Mayor Wisman in Arlington, who says that he and Lakeland are talking about the possibility of a shared superintendent, separate school systems, but a common superintendent. He also, and Keith McDonald, the mayor of Bartlett, have said that not all municipalities are alike in terms of what they're seeking for their school systems. How do you feel about the possibility of a shared superintendent among maybe not all 6, but maybe 2 or more of them? Is that something either of your cities are interested in?
I think that we still lack absolute clarity on whether that is permissible under the law, and I certainly would not say anything counter to what Mike Wisman says, because he's a member of the school board, as well as the mayor. But I think there needs to be some clarity there. Right now, our particular scenario that we've been following for creation of a district imagines that we will have our own. But we have also talked about the value of cooperative contracts and things. So I think that's still kind of sitting out there.
Yeah, I would concur with Mayor Goldsworthy. I think that we did check with Nashville, and were advised that was okay to do that, but it was not advised that you would do it that way. I think that probably our school board is going to want to have their own superintendent, so to speak, and you know, that'll be their hire. As we've talked about before. So,
and that was the nature, I mean, from your point of view, that was always the nature of the debate, was local control, right?
Correct.
I mean, it wasn't about race, it wasn't about, you know, this
Absolutely.
massive, you know, bureaucracy. It was about local control, less bureaucracy, and so that would seem to be that
Exactly.
you would, you know, not even combine back into the old county school system, but have your own islands.
On the general topic of shared services, is it possible that we could see shared services that resolve the issue of the school buildings without necessarily settling who owns them, at this point at least?
I think absolutely. We have contended that the buildings are held in trust for the children who go to the schools, and so, you know, following that same train of thought is who owns them. You know, they're owned and held in trust for the children.
Mayor Goldsworthy?
I would agree. I think in terms of talking about contracts, there are some practical things that we'll be looking at, not only with maybe the unified district, but also with each other. One of the things that is specific to Germantown is that we educate close to 1,000 kids from Collierville in 2 of our schools, and we've always kind of had an understanding, we'll work this out.
Sure.
Right, and is that true with the kids in unincorporated Shelby County who
As well.
now goes to Germantown or go to Collierville? So
Absolutely.
many of them. Just a minute left, and this is too big a question for a minute left. With this kind of city-suburban fight almost behind us, are there ways in which the city and the suburbs and so on should be working together more closely? Economic development, for instance. The ways, people talk about, the many are stronger than the independent. Do you see that happening real quickly?
Well, I would certainly hope that we would see more evidence of it happening. I don't, at this time, I think there's that we and they
Right.
mentality that needs to go away.
Okay. I think we're in a better place than we have been in the past. Yesterday, Mayor Luttrell advised that there was $400,000 being made available to the suburban, or actually to all the municipalities for some very specific initiatives. And that's very, very helpful to us, not only in terms of the money that we might be able to use for some very specific strategies, but also just in the sense of cooperation.
Okay.
There's a lot of value.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you both for being here. Thank you, Bill, and thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.